Welcome to Jerry Bay's Friend-Tastic Library, the podcast. Just kidding, it's not a podcast today. I'm going to talk about books. So it's another book versus movie day. And we're going to do Big Little Lies. I'm wanting to do this one for a really long time because I read the book and then immediately watched the show right after, but that all happened in 2021. So I had to revisit it. I had to go back and kind of skim through some of the episodes, get a feel for it again, refresh my memory. Go back and re-listen to some of the book just to make sure I remembered things correctly. And then I took notes. So this is what started recently because I realized my other ones were kind of a mess and I was kind of forgetting stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't have notes. So now I just have I was going to make an Amber Heard joke, but I just have a Post-it for my notes. If you keep up with the Heard versus Depp trials, you'll get that little joke. Anyways. So, I'm making myself laugh. That was a joke for me, not for you. Anyway, my apologies. So, Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. If you've watched 9 Perfect Strangers, then you'll know that Liane Moriarty is by far I think I can go as far as to say my favorite artist. I've read so many books since reading her books, but still there hasn't been an artist yet that I've read as many books by them as her. I've read every single book she's ever written besides Last Anniversary. And if you didn't watch 9 Perfect Strangers, then I'll tell you here that the only reason I haven't done it yet is because the audiobook is kind of trash. And it just takes me a long time to get through real in-person books instead of audiobooks. So that's that. Okay, so Big Little Lies. Liane Moriarty must really love Nicole Kidman because Nicole Kidman is in both the 9 Perfect Strangers show and the Big Little Lies show. Liane Moriarty's books are all thriller romances where there's it's contemporary romance, but there's always a twist. And everything's always set in Australia because she is Australian. And if you listen to her audiobooks, the narrators are always Australian, so it's very pleasing to listen to, in my opinion. Okay, so Big Little Lies as a book, I don't even remember what I rated it. I probably rated it 5 stars because she's my favorite author. And it is confusing at first, but I feel once you get past the first 2-ish chapters, it starts to kind of make sense. So the book, I don't know where to watch the show now that I think about it. I think the show is on HBO or Hulu. It's one of those H's. It's either HBO or Hulu. But the show, season 1 is the book. Season 2 is totally made up by TV people. And I think Liane Moriarty has some sort of say in it. But I didn't even watch season 2. So we should just put that out there right now. I've only watched season 1. I read the book first, then watched it. This all happened in 2021 at some point. Okay, so where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so the book starts out with you hear police officers interviewing a bunch of random people. So it's confusing at first because you're bombarded with names and you have no idea who they are. So that's why at first I was oh, I don't know, Liane. I don't know if I'll get into this one. It's kind of confusing. But I just pushed through and got to chapter 2, 3, and it was it was getting good by then. And then you start to realize oh, okay, I get it now. This is going to be a back and forth between interviewing what happened and then we flash back to the past and get the backstory. So yeah, there's a whole thing. One of the main characters is Madeline, and she turns 40. So whenever the book starts, she's I'm turning 40 today. And I love it so much. And then she has her daughter with her, and her daughter's oh, Calamity. And that's their little family inside joke, and it's really cute. So what's interesting is that this book is set in Australia, obviously, but the town is totally made up. Whatever town they call it, I can't remember. It doesn't exist in Australia. But what's interesting is while they're describing the town, I totally pictured the Central Coast of California, Monterey Coast, Monterey Bay Coast area. I mean, I live here, so maybe I'm kind of biased. But it felt like the way they were describing it kind of fit with the ocean and the cliffs and like the weather and all that, and like the mix of socioeconomic status between people. I was like, oh my god, this is Monterey. So it's very interesting that they chose to film parts of it in Monterey and kind of pretend that it's set in Monterey, California instead of Australia. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, that's what the first right out the gate difference between book and movie is. Yeah, one is a made up town in Australia, the other is Monterey, California. But since I live here, I thought it was really interesting. What else? Yeah, so Madeline, I think it's safe to say that Madeline is the main character. I think a lot happens through her perspective. And the other characters like Jane and Celeste are kind of in my opinion, they're secondary characters. Although the whole twist at the end is solely around Jane. I forgot to say this has spoilers. If you've not seen the show or read the book and you don't want any spoilers, please do not watch this. Pause it, go read, watch, come back, whichever you prefer. I will say that I don't think you need to do both. I think if you are a reader and you really enjoy books, you can read the book. I think if you are not a reader and you don't enjoy books, you can watch the show. They're pretty darn close, in my opinion. There are like subtle differences, but I think they're close enough that you can enjoy either one, and you won't get any spoilers after you watch or read one or the other. Anyways, so that's out of the way. Spoilers, for sure, spoilers. There is a big ending to this, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody if you've not watched it or read it. The ending is really big and really important. The twist is awesome. Okay. Same thing with 9 Perfect Strangers. Like, I feel like there is no way to enjoy that movie or book if you have heard the spoilers, because it just ruins too much, in my opinion. So, with that said, okay, so Madeline, being the main character, in my opinion, has an ex-husband named Tom. No. Tom is the coffee guy. What's her ex? I can't remember her ex-husband's name. But she has a new husband named Ed. And then she has 3 kids. She has Abigail, a son who I don't know his name, classic middle child syndrome. And then she has her daughter. I don't actually know if I remember her daughter's name either. Did I write it down? I feel like it's not important. Yeah, I didn't write it down. So, anyways, she has 3 kids. Her oldest daughter is to her ex-husband, and then her and Ed had 2 kids, the son and the daughter. In the show, the son doesn't exist. Classic middle child. They just said, fuck it, we're not putting him in there. And to be fair, in the book, he's only thrown in. I feel like in the book, he was only thrown in there to just add stress. Like, he just adds noise and stress and arguments to really give you the full frustrating feeling of being a mom with everything that she has going on. Otherwise, he's not like very important or very developed, hence why I don't even know his name. So, her ex-husband is married to a woman named Bonnie, or maybe they're dating. I don't know if they're actually married. And Bonnie is very much a classic hippie, which is why I felt like, again, this was filmed in Monterey, California. Bonnie is definitely a hippie mom that is like all natural and goes to yoga and is like very organic and all this stuff, right? And Madeline pretty much hates her and her ex-husband because her ex-husband left her and her daughter. It's a whole thing. Her kids have a big age gap since she had the first one so young. I think she was like right out of high school, and then the other 2 were later with Ed. So, yeah, that was a big difference too. Is she doesn't have a son in the show. Also, I feel like in the show they had a lot of drama between Ed and her ex-husband, and that didn't really happen. Her ex-husband was just like a classic Hollywood dumb dad, like how they portray dads just being kind of like dopey in Hollywood. That's kind of how her ex-husband was in the book. And Ed was like a classic yes man and a people pleaser. And I think in the book she even complains about like their sex life being boring or something like that. And she loves him because he's so perfect, but there's like no oomph or something. So that's a whole thing. But otherwise, Ed and the ex-husband don't really have beef like they do in the show. What else is there? They go get coffee all the time. Tom, the guy at the coffee shop, is a way better developed character in the book than he is in the show. They don't give Tom any light in that show in season 1, and he is like a whole person in the book. Like, you can picture him. He has a whole vibe, all of it. But yeah, so the big thing is, like, so in the book their kids go to preschool. In the show they go to kindergarten or first grade or something like that. So the kids are also older in the show than they are in the book. And Madeline is best friends with Celeste. Celeste is and her husband are very rich and well off, and Madeline is more like upper middle class. Celeste is very beautiful and perfect and wonderful and very classic Nicole Kidman. Like, her and her husband are like the perfect people. It's like Celeste and Perry, and they're so gorgeous and beautiful together and so perfect. And they have twin boys that are the same age as Celeste's youngest daughter. Sorry, Madeline's youngest daughter. And then there's a new woman named Jane that comes, and she has a son named Ziggy. And so all these kids are the same age, and they all go to preschool for the first day. And then there is Renata, and her daughter is the same age. And Renata's daughter gets like punched or bitten or something like that on the first day. It's an incident, and so then she just points at Ziggy and blames him, and then that just sets off the whole tone for the book/show, where everybody hates Jane and her son Ziggy, and they don't want her son going there, and they think she's weird because she's like a poor single mom that's new to town, and it's a whole thing. So all of that goes down pretty much the same. In the book, Renata is like barely a person. She's not really developed as a character at all. She is just the mean, bitchy mom at preschool that everybody knows and hates. Like, if you have kids, you've pictured a mom, as I'm explaining Renata to you, you've pictured like that person you've had to put up with. So yeah, in the show, they make her a whole rounded character where she's like the only working mom, and nobody understands her because she focused on her career and she loves her job, but they make her out to be this bad person because she loves her job, right? So I do, in a sense, appreciate that they made her more whole in the show, but it was interesting to see that. I think Laura Dern is an amazing actress. I'm really glad that she played Renata and they gave her more of that like rounded feel. But yeah, so things keep going down, and what's interesting is that like in the book, Jane and Celeste get very close. They become really good friends where they're like going on walks or runs every day, and they're really starting to open up to each other. But in the movie, that doesn't happen at all. Jane kind of stays shut down. And you start to learn that Jane was raped, and that's why, and that's how she got pregnant with Ziggy, and that's why she's a single mom. And it wasn't a pleasant experience, and yeah, it's just all bad. And Ziggy doesn't know anything about his dad, but he wants to know. He asks things about his dad, but then he knows not to ask because his mom gets so upset. And in the book, she comes to that town specifically because she looked him up and knew that he lived there. But in the show, they make it out to where she has no idea who he is. He has a name that she's never Googled or looked up. But I think she decides to go there because she sees like a brochure or something on his table. So she ends up going there. But she can't remember what he looks like or anything. So that's an interesting difference. Yeah. The show definitely made Ed and Madeline's relationship more tumultuous. Like, there was no affair in the book. There's an affair in the show where she cheats on Ed a couple times with like a theater assistant or a theater director or whatever his role is. She cheats on Ed with him, and she feels guilty about it forever. And then her and Ed are like fighting a lot. And in the book, her and Ed are pretty happy in person. she shares with her friends or in her inner monologues that she doesn't feel like that spark or that oomph, but she really loves and appreciates him, and there's definitely no affair going on at all. Like, not even thinking about it. So that's interesting. That they, I guess, I think in my opinion they did it the way they did in the show because in a show or a movie setting you can't hear the actor's inner monologue. So you have to bring it to the present, and then the affair is probably just for drama effect, I would assume. I mean, who doesn't love a good affair in a movie, right? Or in a show. So, yeah. Celeste and Perry's relationship between book and show is so fascinating to me. The relationship in the book I felt was more realistic. I feel like whenever you read the book and you hear about Celeste and Perry's relationship, it sounds more plausible, and it sounds like that could happen to you or a friend you know, where it starts off slow with the violence and the meanness, and then eventually you kind of know when it's going to happen, but sometimes you can't stop it, and you still love that person a lot, and you can still like having sex with that person, but the violence is just there, and they're both violent to each other, but him much more so than her, and he does way more damage than she does. So also she goes in the book, she sees a therapist by herself. In the show, I keep wanting to say the movie. In the show, they go to like a couples therapist, but then Celeste just ends up seeing her later by herself. That's a weird thing. But yeah, I feel like in the show they made the relationship so bizarre and out of left field that it didn't feel believable. And maybe I just don't know enough about domestic violence, but I feel like from what I've experienced in my 30 years of bad relationships, the book felt more realistic than the show. The show almost I feel like the show fetishized the violence. And I don't think it was portrayed that way in the book, in my opinion. But I do appreciate that the show brought to light those issues that are in relationships and the complexities that go into domestic violence relationships. Yeah. And like the scenes in the book are just so graphic. I'm kind of glad that they didn't put all of them in the show because the description in the book was very, very graphic. Like, there's a scene in the book of him suffocating her in the couch, and where she almost stops breathing. And there's the straw that really like breaks the camel's back for her is one where he hits her so hard that she is like literally knocks out for a while, and then she lays in bed for days and she loses some memories. And it really takes her a long time to come to. And he really does a lot of damage, and he throws her around the bathroom and stuff. And the boys start to notice it. And yeah, it's just in the book it's really bad. It's really, really bad. There's a lot of trigger warnings with the book. And she finally breaks down, and she spends like a fuck ton of money after that, like a lot. She gives away like I think $100,000 or something like that to charities, and that's her way of getting back at him. But then she decides to listen to this therapist and get her own apartment because she realizes it's never gonna stop and all this stuff. So while all this is going on, while Madeline is dealing with her husband and her kids, and she's trying to get to know Jane, and then Celeste and her husband are just in this whole toxic thing. And then Jane's trying to find out who this guy is, or trying to find the guy that raped her all those years ago. All while this is going on, the kids are having problems in school, where Renata's daughter is constantly being picked on and bullied, and Ziggy keeps taking the blame for it, but the teacher keeps saying that there's nothing wrong with Ziggy and that they're really good friends and they're always talking and they're really nice to each other. Ziggy has to see a therapist. Like, no one thinks that Ziggy's doing it besides the other moms that are friends with Renata. So All of that plays out the same between the book and the movie. The book probably goes into like more detail, obviously, but that's expected. Until finally we get to like the whole oh, I totally forgot before we get to the big twist. So while all of that's going on, Madeline is dealing with her daughter Abigail, who is like idolizing Bonnie instead of her mom. So now her mom's pissed that her oldest daughter likes her stepmom more than her. It's a whole thing. Very understandable. It feels very it feels very realistic and very like it happens in real life. And as a person with blended families growing up with like a stepmom and stuff, I totally felt like it was very realistic and relatable. So while all that other shit is going on that I just talked about, Abigail is becoming this like big activist for everything and only wanting to eat organic and natural or become a vegetarian or whatever she feels like that day because of Bonnie. And then she decides that there's all of these, she doesn't decide, but she learns that all of these women or children in Africa are being forced into marriage and having children at a very young age. As in like they're literally children girls. They're like 13 or something, 11, 12, 13. So Abigail is like a 15 or 16-year-old in the book and in the show. And she decides that she's going to auction off her virginity, and all the money she makes off of auctioning off her virginity is going to go towards these poor people in, I believe it's Africa. It might not be Africa. You can let me know in the comments if I mess that up completely. But yeah, so, and it's like a whole thing. It's a whole thing where she calls up her ex-husband and she's like, what are you thinking? Why did you let her do this? And then she's like yelling at Bonnie. And I think there's a point where Bonnie takes her to go get birth control. And I'm pretty sure that it happens in the book and the show. Maybe it doesn't happen in the show. I don't remember. They kind of blended together since they were so similar so much of the time. But there's other problems between Abigail and Bonnie and Madeline that happen, and she's just dealing with all this shit. And Abigail will not take down the website to save her life. She doesn't care what they do to her, because anything they do to her, the poor girls that are getting married off at such a young age are having it so much worse. And she's not righteous for keeping her virginity, and people are willing to pay big money and all this stuff, right? Just all this stuff. Normal teenage shit. And so I think I pretty much covered it all besides the big ending. We also learn a lot about Bonnie. We learn a lot about Bonnie being molested as a child. And I think I should have taken better notes on this. I'm pretty sure she says she was raped by an ex-boyfriend, or she was molested as a kid or something like that. So yeah, it all boils down to this. Finally, we find out from Ziggy that it's the twins that are. It's the one of Celeste's twins. I can't remember which one, but one of them is the one that's being a bully to Renata's daughter. It's not Ziggy, but Ziggy couldn't tell anybody, because if Ziggy told somebody, then the twin boy would kill Renata's daughter. That's what had been said. And in I believe in the book and in the show, Ziggy doesn't even say it. He just writes it down because his mom tells him. Well, if you write it down, then you're not telling me, and it's okay, then I can just read it. So that's how they find out who is actually causing it, and it's Celeste's son. And so then she, they tell her, and it goes better than expected, because they don't realize that Celeste is getting abused by her husband all the time. And so whenever she tells Celeste, she's like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I feel so bad. And then at the same time, Celeste and Jane are getting really close, and Jane tells her that the man that assaulted her was Saxon Banks. I think it's Saxon Banks. Something like that. Saxon Banks. It sounds right. And she goes, oh, that's Perry's cousin in the book. But in the show, it happens a little bit differently. And in the book, she's like, oh, that's Perry's cousin, my husband. And in the show, they kind of Google him, and it's like a weird guy that lives like out of town or something, and she has to drive over across town to go try to find him. And then she sees him and she's like, that's not the right guy. And then Celeste brings up Perry's cousin to him at one point in the book, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember me and my buddies, whenever we would go out, I used to use my cousin's name so that people wouldn't know that it was me out there acting stupid or something like that. And then she starts to put the pieces together in her head. And so all of it comes crashing down at once, where she's like, oh fuck, my husband has been cheating on me and raped this woman that I'm friends with. And not only that, but he abuses the fuck out of me. And now my sons are abusing, my one son is like abusing a kid in school, right? So her whole life is like crashing down. And she really becomes like one of a really big character in the book. It kind of shifts from Madeline to Celeste, because now Madeline's problems with Abigail and her ex-husband are like not a big deal compared to what Celeste is going through. And Bonnie kind of always has a feeling about Celeste and Perry. And she says that it's something with their eyes. Like, you can just tell that by looking at them in the eyes, something's not right. And she knows these things because she had these issues whenever she was younger and blah, blah, blah. So it all comes to this big event at the end where they all go to this annual ball thing for the school. And it's a big fundraiser. And this year they're all dressing like Audrey Hepburn and somebody else from Breakfast at Tiffany's. I've never actually seen Breakfast at Tiffany's, so I don't know. Anyways. So that's why in the book they're doing I think the show does it too. It's just more subtle, where they do flashbacks of interrogating people and questioning people and then showing what actually happened, because they're interrogating and questioning people after this dance or this ball or fundraiser or whatever, because there's a dead person. So there's been a death and we need to get to the bottom of it. So they're interrogating all these people, and that's how we end up hearing this long drawn out story of all this drama between all these people. And it's kind of like you're hearing it. It's almost as if you're hearing it through the gossip of the town, right? So, yeah, it gets down to this big fundraiser that's like Audrey Hepburn themed, and everybody dresses up and everybody goes, and Celeste is like putting all the pieces together that her life is crashing down around her, and she knows that she needs to leave Perry, and they get into a huge fight in the car, just like they do in the show. The book and the show, it's pretty much the same. But I feel like the ending I'm getting like goosebumps just thinking about it. I feel like the ending in the book is just more satisfying, which is kind of the opposite. I feel like in a lot of book to movie or book to show, the cinema ends up making it much more grandeur than it really is, and in the book it kind of downplays it. But this time I feel like it was the opposite. And the fundraiser becomes a shit show because there's all this drama going on, and then all of these people end up coming together to argue outside on the balcony, and some of them are sitting on stools, and it's rained and it's slippery or whatever, and all of these people have ended up congregating together on the balcony to argue, because Celeste and Perry go out there to argue, and then Renata comes out and Madeline's there, and Celeste is trying to tell Renata that it was her son the whole time, and she's so sorry, and we're gonna get to the bottom of this. And then Bonnie and the ex-husband are there, and all of a sudden Jane comes out and she's like, it's you. And he's like, what? And she's like, it's you. You're the one that raped me and did all that bad stuff to me. And Perry's like laughing. And Celeste is like, Perry, what is wrong with you? And he's like, she's making it all up. This isn't even real. She's just lying. And then she's like, Perry, you won't even look at her. Like, you have to look at her. And he doesn't look at her. So then what ends up happening in both book and movie is Bonnie pushes him and he falls off the balcony and dies. And she just gets so rageful because she can see how much he doesn't care that he hurt this woman. And she knows what it feels like since she was hurt in her past. So she pushes him. And then she pretty much immediately feels horrible guilt. And it was like 2 days later or something in the book, she turns herself in. So in the show, she doesn't turn herself in. She kind of keeps it to herself. and they cover it up. The whole group decides to cover it up, but everybody's feeling sick to their stomach about it. And Ed's like up in arms in the book, and he's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We can't keep lying. And, yeah. And then finally Bonnie just turns herself in. And in the show, that doesn't happen. Also, in the book, there is an affair with Renata and her husband. Renata's nanny ends up sleeping with her husband in the book, so that happens. It's like a subtle little thing to add drama to it. That doesn't happen in the show. The show probably felt like there was enough drama to be had. So, yeah, I think that's it. I know that in the book, Celeste ends up donating like a lot of money to the cause to make Abigail take down her post. And I don't know how that ends in the show. I feel like she just takes it down in the show, and that's it. And like Madeline ends up confessing to her daughter that she cheated on her husband or something. So none of that happens in the book. Is there anything else? I think that's it. The only other thing that's not in the show that is in the book is there's this old woman that lives across the street from the school that they all go to. And so she sees everybody walking to school every day, and she hears bits and pieces of what people are saying to each other. And she hears all of the commotion going on whenever the murder happens at the fundraiser. And she's not in the show at all. She's just in the book. But at the same time, I get it because she's kind of a small part, and it's hard to put somebody like that in a movie or a show. So overall, I thought that this was an excellent book to show. And I think it's because they turned it into a show and not a movie. Because with a show, you do have that time to really develop everyone. And I think they ended up adding stuff pretty well. Like adding Renata as a whole rounded character. And maybe since I haven't seen season 2, maybe they show Bonnie turning herself in season 2. Or maybe they show Renata's nanny having an affair with her husband. I don't know. You guys will have to let me know in the comments. Because I'll probably never watch season 2. But yeah. I think that's all I had that I could think about. It was like a lot, but not at the same time. I think the book and the show both are really interesting and very complex timeline wise, and a lot going on like all at once. So yeah. I think that I think there's a lot to it, but the subtle changes I don't think really deterred me from watching the show. I still really enjoyed the show along with the book. I'm sure I gave the book 5 stars. The show I probably would recommend to all of my friends. Yeah, even if you don't want to read the book, I would recommend it. I don't think if you don't love reading, I think the show is just fine and you get a really great idea of what the book is like. And if you really love reading, I don't think you need to watch the show. But if you like shows, then yeah. It's one of those where I would go either way on it. Because coming from a person that hated reading and never read to a person that just loves reading now, I still really enjoyed the show. So yeah, I'd recommend both of them, depending on the kind of person you are. As far as casting goes, I really liked everybody that was casted except for Jane. I really don't like that actress. I don't even know her name, but I feel like in the book Jane was described as this like really thin, frail woman that almost looked malnourished in a way, and that actress didn't look like that. And in the show, Jane is like obsessed with gum. Sorry, in the book, Jane is like obsessed with gum and constantly nervously chewing it and just like very nervous all the time. And in the show, I don't think they portrayed that enough. Jane and Tom build a really big relationship, and Tom becomes a really big developed character in the book, and that doesn't happen in the show, but they do end up dating. But yeah, I guess I just pictured... I'm trying to think of an example of who I would think would play her. I guess I just pictured like the same vibe for Jane as like, gosh, I can't even think of anybody. Is it Christina Ricci? Whoever played Wednesday Addams in the Addams Family, I've seen pictures of her as an adult. I would picture more of her body type as Jane. It's not that I really expect her face or her persona per se. It's just that her as an adult is like a very slender, thin, almost curveless woman. And that's how I pictured Jane for the book, not the actress that played her. And like I said, I really don't like that actress. It's probably my least favorite thing about the show by far. But as far as all the other casting goes, I thought it was really, really good. I, for some reason, don't picture Reese Witherspoon as a 40-year-old woman, but that's probably how old she actually is. So she's probably really fitting for that spot. I feel like she just looked younger. I already said Laura Dern was good. I liked that. I loved Ed. I loved who they casted as Ed, and he was in Parks and Rec, and I cannot remember his real name for the life of me. But I love him as an actor, and I thought he was a really good Ed. Unexpected, but really good. Um, yeah, I think overall I liked it. It was really cool to see Monterey in a lot of scenes. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks for watching it. Don't forget I have a Patreon. And yeah, don't forget to watch all my other book versus movies. They come out every Wednesday. And I'll have my podcast still on Friday with all my guests. Let me know if you want to be on the show. Let me know if you have recommendations for book versus movie that you'd like to see me do. And yeah, I think that's about it. All right. Thank you so much. I'll spread love and light to you all. Okay, thanks. Bye.